Good morning and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna class. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam swalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satshishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadattatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Jana. So we'll continue where we left off last time, and that is on page 230 of the English Gospel, and it's Monday, June 4th, 1883. So Sri Ramakrishna was at Dakshineshwar. Master Mahashoy, that is M or Sri Ma, he had spent the night at Dakshineshwar at the temple, and so he was there that morning, and several devotees had come in the morning itself. Balaram, Basu, and several devotees had come, and Rakal also was there. So it begins with Sri Ramakrishna sitting in what we read last time, which we just began the chapter last time. Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on the western veranda, that is the round veranda facing the Ganges, for those of you who are familiar with Dakshineshwar and who have been to his room. So he was sitting on the veranda, and of course, for those of you not from India or who haven't visited in India, they weren't sitting in lawn chairs or anything like that. They were sitting on the ground, on the cement floor. And so we'll continue where we left off. The master asked Balaram to stay for his midday meal. Before the meal, Sri Ramakrishna described to the devotees the days of his God intoxication. Rakal, M, Ramlal, and a few others were present. Master, now and then Hajra comes forward to teach me. He says to me, "Why do you think so much about the youngsters?" One day, as I was going to Balaram's house in a carriage, I felt greatly troubled about it. I said to the Divine Mother, "Mother, Hajra admonishes me for worrying about Narendra and the other young boys. He asks me why I forget God and think about these youngsters." No sooner did this thought arise in my mind than the Divine Mother revealed to me in a flash that it is she herself who has become man. But she manifests herself most clearly through a pure soul. At this vision, I went into samadhi. Afterwards, I felt angry with Hajra. I said to myself, "That rascal made me miserable." Then I thought, "But why should I blame the poor man? How is he to know?" So here there's a lot in that paragraph, but it begins by saying that now and then Hajra comes forward to teach me. So we have to remember Hajra the relative of Sri Ramakrishna, nephew or cousin or something, somehow distantly, somewhat a little distantly related to Sri Ramakrishna. He really serves a very important part in the play of Sri Ramakrishna, the divine drama of Sri Ramakrishna's life. And that is, he is there to provide comic entertainment to the play of Sri Ramakrishna. He was was a person who had some virtues. He was very devoted to study of the scriptures. He was knowledgeable about some of the scriptures. But he also was a great hypocrite. And he had worldly tendencies also. Worldly tendencies meaning he wanted to acquire wealth and name and fame. And so he would often challenge Sri Ramakrishna. He would often, as Thakur says here, he would often come forward to teach him. And so many times Sri Ramakrishna, when he was in the mood of a child, as he often was, when Hajra would say something to him, he would become confused and go running to the Divine Mother, and then the Divine Mother would explain to him. So in this is a wonderful phenomenon that it's worth looking into a little bit, because if you look at someone, a great realized soul, fully realized soul like Ramana Maharshi, this sort of thing you don't see happening. Ramana Maharshi was like the Sthita Prajna of the Gita, second chapter of the Gita, who was always in ekarasa, in one mood. Ekarasa means with one taste or one attitude. That is, he was always in the state of the self-realized seer who is aware of himself as Brahman and everything else as just an appearance. And so that didn't fluctuate. He stayed there. And there are many who are much more attracted to Ramana Maharshi than to Sri Ramakrishna. That's fine. There's nothing wrong. He was an illumined soul. But the reason why Ramana Maharshi is attractive to some is that he's uncomplicated. He's just in one state, and we like to think of being like a sage where nothing bothers me. I'm above it all. I'm completely oblivious to the world and just immersed in my own bliss, and that never changes. Of course, there are other people who find that distasteful, the idea of going into a state like that. But Sri Ramakrishna, he could have remained in that state all of the time. He, again, remained for 6 months in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, not even aware of the body. And after that, for a long time, he remained in that sort of consciousness. But Sri Ramakrishna preferred to move at all levels of consciousness, as he himself said. He said some people, like the drone note, which is played in Indian music. In other Western music also, we have the idea, though it's not used as much. But in the Indian music, it's very highly developed, that idea of the continuous tone against which the play of the scale moves. And so Sri Ramakrishna said, some people just like the drone note, just stay in the same all of the time. But he preferred all the notes of the scale. And so what is the difference between him and us? That becomes the next problem, because Sri Ramakrishna got confused by Hajra, and we also might get confused by Hajra. So how is Sri Ramakrishna better than us? We're subject to confusion, and even Sri Ramakrishna, who claims to be an incarnation of God, he also gets confused. So what good is he to us? It's like the question there was, if even Sri Ramakrishna could get cancer, what good is he to us? We want someone who's beyond cancer so we can go beyond cancer too. But he got cancer of the throat, so what good is he to us? Well, no, we have to understand Sri Ramakrishna in a deeper sense, that he was completely free. He was completely identified with God. And so for him, when he is confused and goes running to the Divine Mother to ask her to clear up his confusion, we have to remember that within him, he saw both himself, the devotee, and the Divine Mother as himself. And so he wasn't going from himself to somebody who was an authority, the Divine Mother, because he was confused. Both were parts of his play. Both were taking place within the play of his consciousness. He used to say that, do you understand? Here there are two, the Divine Mother and her devotee. Both were Sri Ramakrishna himself. So going to the Divine Mother, he was going to himself. But he had willingly entered into this state of a child to enjoy the play of the Divine Mother. Have we willingly entered into the state of ignorance for the sake of play with the Divine Mother? No, we find ourselves stuck here. We didn't ask anybody. Nobody asked us. We're just suddenly born, and here we are. And then it takes lifetimes to get out of the mess we find ourselves in. But for Sri Ramakrishna, he was completely free. He was utterly liberated, and had the highest knowledge in the palm of his hand, under complete control. So he willingly entered into the state of a child of the Divine Mother, who also he was, in order to enjoy the play of the child with its mother. And so his state of confusion was not our state of the confusion. Another difference, of course, is that we get confused and we stay confused. but Sri Ramakrishna would have a moment of confusion because he was in the mood of a child and believe whatever anybody told him. Then he would go to the Divine Mother and she would say, no, 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 it's not like that. You love these boys because they are pure souls. It's because you see God within them. That's why you love them so much. And then the child within him would be satisfied. So again, don't think that Sri Ramakrishna's emotional state, here he says also that he got angry at Hajra. Where was it? Afterwards, I felt angry with Hajra. How is that? A realized soul is supposed to go beyond anger. We're all supposed to practice to transcending anger, to go above anger. And here Sri Ramakrishna, what use is he to us? He gets angry with Hajra. What good is that to us? We also get angry, so what can he do for us? No, again, we have to remember that with him, all of that was play. When we get angry, it's not play. We get angry because we take everything deadly serious. And our anger has a terrible deluding power, confusing power, deluding power, veiling power over the mind. We lose all sense of proportion, we lose good judgment and all of that. But in Sri Ramakrishna's case, he could assume any emotion, but he would assume it fully. And yet, because he was fully aware of his unity with the divine being, something that was always there within him, that anger was like a wave that arose as part of his play in this drama of life. So he saw himself as a child playing with the Divine Mother and going through different emotions, like the time when Lakshmi Narayan Marwari, a very wealthy man, came to offer him money and tried to force money on Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna jumped on his back and started pounding on his head and shoulders, saying, "You're trying to make me a worldly man." Can you imagine Ramana Maharshi doing that? No, you can't imagine Ramana Maharshi doing that. I'm not putting down Ramana Maharshi. He was a fully illumined soul, a great soul, but of a different type. Again, one who wanted to remain in the same state all of the time. And that's good. If you can stay in that state, what a great blessing it would be. But Sri Ramakrishna could remain in that state, but he didn't want to. He wanted to experience all of the notes of the scale again, sa re ga ma pa da ni. He wanted to go through all of the scales, the Indian do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So he assumed different attitudes, different emotional states, and so on, because he was enjoying the play of the Divine Mother. So she manifests herself most clearly through a pure soul. So he saw the Divine Mother showed him that it is she, the Divine Mother. That is, it is the divine reality, Brahman, which has become all beings. Every being is a manifestation of that. But he also saw that is most manifest in a pure soul. And that's why he loved these youngsters that came to him. It was because of the purity of their hearts. He saw that they had not yet entered into the world. Their hearts were pure. and not even like an ordinary youth, but these who had come to him were people that, young men who had taken birth to accompany him. And so they were extraordinary spiritual souls from their past who came into this world. At this point, they didn't know it yet because at the time of birth, that forgetfulness comes over us of our past lives and past experiences. And so that happened even to these great souls. But because of their past lives, they had an intense desire for God from an early age. And so it wasn't that they were pure because their samskaras had not yet developed, like most young people. They just haven't gotten to an age where they can act out their lower samskaras. No, it was that they came into the world with extraordinary spiritual samskaras. And so the presence of God was especially clearly manifest within them. And that's why Sri Ramakrishna longed to have their company. So afterwards, I felt angry with Hazra. I said to myself, that rascal made me miserable. Then I thought, but why should I blame the poor man? How is he to know? So yes, how is Hazra to know? How would we know? So Sri Ramakrishna realized that he knew because the Divine Mother had shown him, but Hazra was just a ordinary, ignorant person. So he continues, I know these youngsters to be Narayana himself, that is God himself. At my first meeting with Narendra, I found him completely indifferent to his body. When I touched his chest with my hand, he lost consciousness of the outer world. Regaining consciousness, Narendra said, "Oh, what have you done to me? I have my father and my mother at home." The same thing happened at Jaddu Malik's house, that is between Sri Ramakrishna and Narendra. As the days passed, I longed more and more to see him. My heart yearned for him. One day at that time, I said to Bholanath, who is an officer at the Kali temple, "Can you tell me why I should feel this way? There is a boy called Narendra of the Kayastha caste. Why should I feel so restless for him?" Bholanath told me, "You will find the explanation in the Mahabharata. On coming down to the plane of ordinary consciousness, a man established in samadhi enjoys himself in the company of sattvic people. He feels peace of mind at the sight of such men." When I heard this, my mind was set at ease. Now and then I would sit alone and weep for the sight of Narendra. So this also is an extraordinary thing, that we weep. Sri Ramakrishna also wept. We may weep for wives or children or parents or dear friends and so forth. And Sri Ramakrishna is weeping for Narendra. He wants to see him so badly. So what's the difference between him and us? Why should we worship a person who was so emotionally weak that he started weeping for the sight of Narendra? And that indeed is what Narendra himself thought. Narendra himself used to scold him. We have to remember, those of us from the West, that when we read that Narendra scolded Sri Ramakrishna, in the West, it's just, this isn't good or bad, this is just a cultural difference. In the West, when we scold somebody, it's because we mean it. We really are upset and we want them to, and so scolding has the sense of being something serious, being hard and serious, and you stop it now, like that. That's scolding. But in India, when they say scolding in this sense, it can be serious too, but in this sense, when they say scolding, it's a loving scolding. It's telling Sri Ramakrishna that, why do you have these feelings for me? It doesn't look good, it's not dignified, you should try to control yourself, but saying it in a sweet and loving way. So we shouldn't get the idea that Narendra was coming before Sri Ramakrishna and going like that. No, not that kind of scolding. A loving arguing with him, as one might do with a parent who's sick who doesn't want to take their medicine. So, oh, what a state of mind I passed through. When I first had that experience, I could not perceive the coming and going of day or night. People said I was insane. What else could they say? They made me marry. I was then in a state of God intoxication. At first, I felt worried about my wife. Then I thought she too would eat and drink and live like me. So this also is a wonderful statement. And he says, oh, what a state of mind I passed through at the beginning of this paragraph. And then after this paragraph, he'll start talking about the states that he passed through, some of them, of course, because he was in states all day, every day for his life after his period of sadhana. For many years. So he says that when he first had that state of divine awareness, then he was unaware of the passing of day and night, or even during the period of his sadhana when he was practicing, because that's when they had him married, soon after he had begun his intense spiritual practice. So he was unaware of day and night. His mind was so focused on finding God that whether it was day or whether it was night was lost to him. So things like that we should think deeply about, just to try to imagine. I don't mean think deeply about it, analyzing it and say, what does this mean and how could it be and so forth. But I mean, think deeply about it in the sense of trying to feel just a tiny, tiny, small bit of what it was he was going through. To think of someone who was so intent on attaining the goal he was seeking, the spiritual realization, the vision of the Divine Mother, the realization of the Divine Mother, so intent on that he wasn't even aware of the passing of day and night. So you see a similar thing, not to that extent, but a similar thing in people who have attained greatness in any field. For instance, scientists. They're examples of great scientists who, when they were working on a research project, who forgot all about eating, and the wife would come to them and say, you've missed your lunch and now it's supper. Aren't you going to come for supper? I said, oh, I didn't even know. Lunch is already over. They were unaware of the passing of time. And or a great writer or artist or something, so immersed in their work that they are forgetful of time, forgetful of eating. And so here was someone who was so immersed in the search for God, the longing for God, that he was completely unaware of the passing of day and night, what day it was, whether it was even day or whether it was night. So then he says that people said that he was insane. I've dealt with this several times in this series of classes on the gospel, but let me say again, since he brings it up here, that people have made too much of Sri Ramakrishna's being like a madman. He did not impress people as a madman at all. He impressed people very deeply. Sometimes people would be offended by his simple way of stating things, like when Sri Ramakrishna first went to see Keshav Chandra Sen, the first time when he went uninvited. He just went to Keshav's garden house and appeared and began to talk to him. And he said to him, I see that your tail has dropped off. And the devotees around, Keshav's devotees around him, they were highly offended, talking to the great Keshav Chandra Sen, who has gone to the Queen of England and is known around the world. Great scholars like Max Muller know of him and write about him, and such a great man, and you're saying something strange about his tail falling off. And so they were about to grab Sri Ramakrishna and carry him out. But Keshav said, no, let him speak. Because he had the insight to see that, no, this is there's something special about this man. He didn't impress Keshav as insane at all. Keshav saw that, no, there's something great about him. The reason why others reacted was that he said something that could be taken as an insult, that I see that your tail has fallen off. Where in the world did that come from? Of course, then he explained, after the reaction of the people, that like the tadpole, when its tail falls off, then it's able, as a frog, it's able to live on land or in water. And so you are able to live on land, that is, in the ordinary state, or in the water of God consciousness. So, of course, it had deep meaning. But even before he knew that, Keshav knew that there was something special about this man. So it was not that Sri Ramakrishna impressed everybody as a madman. Narendra thought that Sri Ramakrishna was a madman, but at the same time, he said, I've never seen a man of such purity in my life. But he thought that Sri Ramakrishna was mad because he started weeping in front of this teenage boy who was just a college student and saying, "Oh Lord, finally you have come to me. Why have you kept me waiting for so long? I've been waiting for you for years. My heart is being wrung like a wet towel," and so forth. While he's weeping in front of Narendra, this boy who's just come to him for the first time, and this man is acting like that. So Narendra naturally thought that he was mad. That was because of what Sri Ramakrishna was saying to him, where Narendra had no understanding of the context. I'm just a college student, nobody knows who I am, and here he's addressing me as God and saying, why have you waited so long to come? I've been longing to see you. He doesn't even know who I am. So other things like that. And then Sri Ramakrishna, at an earlier time, during his early sadhana, when he was asked or told by his family to marry, and they arranged his marriage. At that time, also, they thought that he was mad because, again, not because he was walking down the street talking to himself and shouting and doing things like a mad person might, but because he showed no interest in the world at all. And that was a traditional cure, and it still is a cure in India today for people who seem to not be paying attention to their responsibilities. Is if a young person, will get them married so that they have to start thinking about their responsibilities. It's sort of the cure-all for irresponsibility in India. get the person married, so then now he'll have to pay attention to his worldly duties. So they tried that for Sri Ramakrishna. So again, yes, Sri Ramakrishna sometimes acted strangely, unusually because of the intensity of his mood, but it's much overdone, this talk about him being as if he were a madman, as Swami Ramakrishnanandaji and others have also said, that he impressed people with great dignity and with the depth of his character and so forth, which is why so many people came to see him. So, and also he says, at first I felt worried about my wife, that is after he was married. That also is interesting because again, we were talking about Sri Ramakrishna and the state of a sthita prajna and then Sri Ramakrishna. So at this point, it was still during the period of his sadhana, but he had already had some experiences of the Divine Mother. It was early in his period of sadhana, but still he had already had some significant spiritual awakening by this time. But he began to worry about his wife, realizing that, yes, I have married, and she's going to be dependent on me. And how is she going to live? What is she going to do? So it was a sign of the thought of another's welfare, a sign of his goodness. But then he realized that, the Divine Mother has something else in store for me. And so if the Divine Mother has brought me into a state of marriage, then my wife also will live like I do, depending on God for everything, not storing anything for myself, not thinking about the tomorrow. And so then he became satisfied and was able again to free his mind completely from all concern. He continues, I visited my father-in-law's house. They arranged a kirtan. It was a great religious festival, and there was much singing of God's holy name. Now and then I would wonder about my future. I would say to the Divine Mother, Mother, I shall take my spiritual experiences to be real if the landlords of the country show me respect. They too came of their own accord and talked with me. So that also is interesting. Let me go to the end of that first while I'm thinking about it. That he said that, oh mother, if the landlords of the region, the jamindars, as they were called, come to me and show me respect, then I shall know that my visions are correct. So why did he say that? Of course, the obvious reason is because he wanted to know if his visions were true. But it was because he knew that there was little chance of the village jamindars, who were big people. And in India, where the society at that time, even now, but at that time especially, was highly hierarchical. And a person of status wouldn't deign to meet or associate with people of low status. And so though Sri Ramakrishna was from a Brahmin family, the highest in the order of castes, he was a person of insignificance in worldly terms. And so he was a poor man, just a temple priest, and just come and was singing kirtan. So there's no reason for the local jamindars to come and meet with such a lowly man as Sri Ramakrishna. But they did. They came, they spoke with him respectfully and so forth. An interesting thing is that when you read the lives of great saints of different traditions, it's a wonderful practice. It's a spiritual practice in itself because it begins to fill out and amplify your understanding of what spirituality is and how spiritual people act. For instance, Saint Teresa, there are incidents like this in her life where she had had spiritual awakening. She was having visions, extraordinary visions. But like Sri Ramakrishna and like other great souls who passed through that period of spiritual practice, including even Ramana Maharshi in the beginning, then there would be the doubt, is what I'm experiencing true? When they're in that state, seeing a spiritual revelation, in a state of ecstasy, having a vision or a spiritual experience, at that time there's utter certainty. But then they come back to the perception of the ordinary world, and then they think, was that true? What I saw, was that, or is it just my imagination? In this state, then doubt comes back to the mind. In that state, there's no place for doubt. In this state, again, doubts arise. And so Saint Teresa of Avila, the Christian saint, great Christian saint, she also did like Sri Ramakrishna at one point where she was having visions, and she was doubtful at times out of the vision. She was doubtful whether she was going crazy or whether the visions were true. And so she said, if such and such a thing happens, then I will know that she said to God in prayer, that if such and such a thing happens, if such and such a person comes to see me, then I will know that this is true, something that was completely unexpected. And then it happened. And so that doesn't mean that we should do that casually all of the time. This is for a person who is already in a state of beginning state of God consciousness and experience of spiritual things. That when they come back to the ordinary plane, that doubt arises. But because of that spiritual awakening and that closeness to God which comes through that, then one feels that right to that ability, because of one's closeness to God, to make demands that I don't know what's happening. If what is happening is good, you please show it to me by a sign or by this sign, like in this case, that the Jamindars come and respect me. So that's what happened. So again, that was in Jairambati, when he went to his father-in-law's house. Oh, what an ecstatic state it was. Even the slightest suggestion would awaken my spiritual consciousness. I worshipped the beautiful, that is Sundari, the beautiful in a girl 14 years old. I saw that she was the personification of the Divine Mother. At the end of the worship, I bowed before her and offered a rupee at her feet. One day I witnessed a Ram Leela performance. I saw the performers to be the actual Sita, Rama and Lakshman, Hanuman and Bibhishana. Then I worshipped the actors and actresses who played those parts. So here he's talking about the process of Uddipan in Sanskrit and Bengali or Hindi, the Sanskritic languages. That is the awakening of spiritual consciousness by just the slightest suggestion. Here he says that he worshipped the beautiful, that is Sundari, the beautiful aspect of the Divine Mother, God as beauty, in a 14-year-old girl. And she actually revealed, or the Divine Mother revealed herself through that girl to him. He saw that the girl was the embodiment of the Divine Mother as Sundari, the beautiful, as beauty itself. At the end of the worship, I bowed before her and offered a rupee at her feet. And then one day he went to see Ram Leela, that is a dramatic performance, a village performance usually, or sometimes they're professional troops of village people who go from village to village, performing the Ram Leela, that is the play of the story of Sri Ram's life. It's a wonderful thing to see when the actors are good. So Sri Ramakrishna, watching it, he saw that the actors were the actual people. He saw Rama as the actor, as actual Rama, not a person playing Rama, where he suspended disbelief. When we watch a movie or a dramatic performance, then the effectiveness of the performance can be gauged by how easy it is for us to suspend disbelief. That is, to become involved in the action and to forget ourselves and to be absorbed in the reality of the performance. So if we're sitting there watching a dramatic performance and we're conscious that, well, here I am sitting in this lousy theater in this uncomfortable seat, and there on the stage, all these people running around and all kinds of things happening and saying all kinds of stupid dialogue and things, you can't enjoy a play that way, being cynical and sitting there just thinking about how miserable I am sitting here watching all of this stuff going on the stage. No, you enjoy a performance to the extent that you forget yourself, you forget your surroundings, and you're absorbed in the living experience of the story. But in our case, that's a relative thing. We suspend the disbelief when the performance is good, and we enjoy the story to the extent that we become absorbed in it. But that absorption is partial. That is, we don't completely get caught up where the reality replaces the actors and the stage. But that was Sri Ramakrishna's state, where he actually saw the actor playing Rama as Rama himself, the actress playing Sita, or it probably was an actor, because in those days in India, oftentimes women's parts were played by men also. There were men who specialized in acting the parts of women. And so the actor playing the part of Sita appeared to him as the real Sita, and so forth, and Hanuman, etc. So he saw the reality. Now that also was that because it was sort of a process of hypnotization that he saw this, because the actor wasn't Rama. The one playing Sita was not Sita. The one playing Hanuman wasn't even an actual monkey, much less Hanuman. So was he hypnotizing himself? Was he just convincing himself, working himself up into a state where he forgot reality and saw something else through the obsession of his mind? No, it wasn't like that. There is a state that a person can attain to, a very high state, where a person sees that everyone that we see, everyone that we meet is a fully illumined soul. And everyone here in the world is just playing a part. Everyone is just acting a part. It's a very strange state that some people have reported, where they actually see everyone as illumined, everyone as free, everyone as fully aware of their own divine nature, but they have just chosen to play here. And that is the actual truth. We've forgotten that we've come here to play and that we are playing, but there's a part of us that has never forgotten. It's not accessible to us now. We're in this strange state where we've identified with the forgetful part of ourselves, but there is a part of us which is never forgotten. So Sri Ramakrishna, when he saw the actual Rama revealed, the actual Sita revealed, he was seeing reality. We who are just seeing actors on the stage are not seeing reality. We're seeing this dream of ours. So again, don't think that when Sri Ramakrishna goes into that state, it was like taking drugs where everything gets distorted and you enjoy all of those distortions and things. No, he was seeing a deeper truth, that Rama, who dwells in the hearts of all, was manifest there in the actor. Sita, who dwells in the hearts of all, was manifest there in the actor, and so forth. At that time, I used to invite maidens, Kumaris. I used to invite maidens here and worship them. I found them to be the embodiments of the Divine Mother herself. So that's a practice which is done in India among those who worship the Divine Mother. To worship a young girl somewhere between the ages of usually between the ages of 5 and 16, often between 5 and 12, but sometimes up to 16 or so. Girls are worshipped as an embodiment of the Divine Mother. And it's a beautiful thing to see. We have that at Belur Math, the Kumari Puja, during Durga Puja, the 8th day of the celebration of Navaratri. There's the Mahashtami. There's the worship of Kumari Puja. So every year, families of devotees who have young daughters within the age range, at Belur Math usually it's somewhere between 6 and 8, 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there usually. So they'll come, bring their daughters to Belur Math to see the president of the order. The president of the order will just observe all of them, and then he will pick and say, this year, this one. And so that girl becomes the Kumari for that year. But it's a beautiful thing to watch, to see the presence of the Divine Mother invoked in this young girl, and then the girl worshipped as the Divine Mother herself. Swami Vivekananda did that. In fact, he did it to a Muslim girl in Kashmir. And he also did it to another young woman, or a girl, at Belur Math. And that woman later became a great saint. She became the teacher of Krishna, what's his name? Krishna Prem. Krishna Prem was an Englishman who went to India, and he studied, I forget his guru's name, but it was a woman, and this woman had been worshipped as Kumari by Swami Vivekananda, and she became a great saint, and Krishna Prem was her disciple, and he became a great saint, highly regarded in India, who lived outside of Almora in the Himalayas. One day, I saw a woman in blue standing near the bakul tree. She was a prostitute, but she instantly kindled in me the vision of Sita. I forgot the woman. I saw that it was Sita herself on her way to meet Rama after her rescue from Ravana in Ceylon. For a long time, I remained in samadhi, unconscious of the outer world. So this is not a unique happening in the case of Sri Ramakrishna. Here he mentions this one time when he saw a prostitute standing under the bakul tree, and he saw her as Sita. But there are also incidents where, when he was still doing worship in the Kali temple, that a prostitute came to the door of the temple, he saw her, and he offered to her the things that were the offerings meant for the Divine Mother, because he saw her as the Divine Mother. And so everything, again, would create this uddipan, this awakening of spiritual consciousness, the slightest suggestion. Another day, I had gone to the Maidan in Calcutta for fresh air. A great crowd had assembled there to watch a balloon ascent. Suddenly, I saw an English boy leaning against a tree. As he stood there, his body was bent in 3 places, tribhanga. The vision of Krishna came before me in a flash. I went into samadhi. So again, that is a famous incident that those of you who have read the life of Sri Ramakrishna before will be familiar with it. That the English boy also created that awakening of consciousness. He saw in the boy Krishna himself, because the boy was bent in 3 places, as Krishna's shown bent in 3 places as a boy playing the flute. At that time, I was Oh no. Once at Sihor, I fed the cowherd boys. I put sweetmeats into their hands. I saw that these boys were actually the cowherd boys of Brindaban, and I partook of the sweetmeats from their hands. At that time, I was almost unconscious of the outer world. Mathur Babu kept me at his Jan Bajar mansion a few days. While living there, I regarded myself as the handmaid of the Divine Mother. The ladies of the house didn't feel at all bashful with me. They felt as free before me as women feel before a small boy or girl. I used to escort Mathur's daughter to her husband's chamber with the maidservant. So that's an extraordinary thing, that Sri Ramakrishna was in this state where everything spoke of the divine. So escorting the daughter to her husband's chamber, he did, again, with that spiritual consciousness. Even now, the slightest thing awakens God consciousness in me. Rakal used to repeat the name of God half aloud. At such times, I couldn't control myself. It would rouse my spiritual consciousness and overwhelm me. So here again, all of these things speak of the tremendous ability of Sri Ramakrishna to remain right on the edge of spiritual consciousness, so that the slightest suggestion plunged him into that awareness. It's like a young man and young woman falling in love, especially if it's the first time they've fallen in love with anyone. They fall in love, and then even when they're apart, everything reminds the one of the other. Everything reminds them of that, and that's all that they can think about. And the slightest suggestion sends them into a reverie about their loved one. And so with Sri Ramakrishna, he was so close to the edge of spiritual consciousness that even when he was in what we can call transactional consciousness, Vyavaharika state of mind, then the slightest thing would remind him of the reality. So in the case of a young man and woman who fall in love, it's not that they're reminded of the reality, it's just that they forget everything else except for their love for the other person. But in Sri Ramakrishna's case, that uddipan, that awakening of through a suggestion. Uddipan means the awakening through a suggestion to spiritual consciousness, was the slightest thing would remind him of the reality. And this realm of unreality, or of half reality, of misperceived reality, this would give way to perception of the reality. So it was not obsession that led to monomania or something like that. It was the purity of his mind, which was always right on the verge of going into spiritual awareness of the ultimate truth. And anything would cut the veil and plunge his mind back into the ocean of spiritual experience. Sri Ramakrishna went on describing the different experiences he had had while worshiping the Divine Mother as her handmaid. He said, "Once I imitated a professional woman singer for a man singer. He said my acting was quite correct and asked me where I had learnt it. The master repeated his imitation for the devotees, and they burst into laughter." So Sri Ramakrishna was said to have been an expert mimic. And so a good mimic, of course, can mimic the accent and the gestures and the facial expressions of another person that we're all familiar with. It's one of the elements of comedy. But with Sri Ramakrishna, because he could put himself into any idea, because he had that, his mind was completely free, and his mind was completely pure, just as a crystal. A crystal placed near a red hibiscus, it appears red. You place it next to a piece of blue satin, it appears blue. Because of the purity of the crystal, it takes on the color of whatever it's close to. And so with Sri Ramakrishna's mind, he had the ability to absorb himself in any idea. And so that was the secret of his extraordinary acting abilities. From his childhood, he had been a good actor. He would hear a play in the village one time, and just hearing it once, he would thereby have memorized the whole play, all of the parts of all of the actors, their dialogue, everything. Extraordinary mind, where that Shruti Dhara memory, where he could memorize a whole play just by seeing it once, or memorize a book by reading it once. And so then he would go with his friends, the other boys of the village. They'd go to the mango grove, and there he would teach them their parts, and they would put on the play again to entertain themselves. So he had that ability to put himself in tune with an idea, become absorbed in it, and then to express it from the inside. And so it's been said by various people that he had that ability, amazing ability to put himself in the mood and attitude of a woman, where all of his gestures, his facial expression, his voice, everything would become so transformed that if he put on the dress of a woman and perhaps either a cover over his head or a wig, that even people who knew him well couldn't tell who he was. They would ask, as happened at Mathur Babu's house. Mathur Babu, who knew Sri Ramakrishna so well, so intimately, when he saw Sri Ramakrishna dressed as a woman, playing the part of the handmaiden of the Divine Mother, there in his house with the other women, he asked others, "Who is that woman who has come to the house?" And not recognizing that it was Sri Ramakrishna. So again, a good actor has that ability to put themselves to identify with the part that they're playing. But Sri Ramakrishna's acting went even deeper than that. The same general principle, except that he went to the very heart of the idea and became so identified with it that he expressed it. It wasn't acting from the outside, it was acting from inside the idea, and that idea taking over his being, so that his movements and everything became quite realistic. So we'll stop here. This is a good place to stop, and we'll continue next time after his noon meal. So let me make announcements, and then if there are any questions, I'll take those. But first, I'll give the announcements, which are fairly simple. On Sunday, this Sunday, there'll be no lecture because I'm leaving tomorrow for Dallas to give a workshop. Tomorrow night, I have a parlor talk, satsang, or a parlor talk tomorrow evening. And then all day Saturday and all day Sunday, I and Swami Sarvapriyananda will be giving a workshop. And then Monday, I will return. So Sunday, there's no talk here, on here now, meaning live streamed. But then on Tuesday, we'll continue with our Gita class at 7:30, and next Thursday, we'll continue with this class. The only other announcement is that on Saturday, October 17th, we have the Durga Puja, and we'll be sending out an announcement soon about that. But the Durga Puja, as I've said before, will be performed here in the hall without a congregation. It will be live streamed. And after the puja, when the puja is over, those who want to come to the temple and pay their respects to the image, bow before the image, to offer a flower or whatever, then we'll have volunteers stationed so that you can come in one family unit at a time, come in, make pranam, and then go back out to the side as another family unit comes in. So that will all be announced soon. So now let's see, any questions? Why was God focused on finding God? Yes, a good question, Regina. Why was God focused on finding God? Why was Sri Ramakrishna, who is an incarnation of God, who came from a state of identity with God, took human form as an incarnation of God, why did he have to seek God? Swami Saradananda, the disciple of Sri Ramakrishna and his prime biographer, the authentic biographical material starts with Swami Saradananda's biography. And so he goes to great lengths to explain the fact that Sri Ramakrishna did everything he did for our sake. But it wasn't, in that sense, pretend. So many people, including some of his own devotees, thought that because Sri Ramakrishna was God and because he was identical with God, even took birth as an incarnation of God, therefore all of his spiritual practice and struggle was just for show, just to educate us. But he didn't need it, and so he was just pretending to go through sadhana to attain that which he already had. So Swami Sardananda says, if that had been the case, it would not be convincing to anyone. So he says that even in the case of an incarnation, and we could refer to stories of or sayings of Sri Ramakrishna which indicate the same. So Swami Sardananda said, even an incarnation of God, when they take birth, a thin veil of forgetfulness comes over their mind. And then when they attain to an age where they can, where that desire to go back to their own state comes, they also have to struggle. They also have to go through great struggle. So you see that Sri Ramakrishna, that he went through tremendous struggle to attain to the Divine Mother. So he had that thin veil pulled over his mind, which was thin enough so that even in his childhood, sometimes there were flashes of illumination that came through. And yet that vision wasn't clear. And so once he came to the Kali temple, that intense longing to discover the Divine Mother fully came over him. And so he was not play acting. He was really struggling for the attainment of the Divine Mother. But the intensity of his struggle is explained by the fact that his own natural state was identical with God, and finding himself in a state of partial bondage because of that forgetfulness, that created tremendous longing in him. Even that is for our illumination, so that we can see that incredible longing which kept him from sleeping for 12 years without sleep because of the intensity of his longing. That if he had that kind of longing, then let me try to feel something. Let me try to feel some longing for God. So he serves as the example of the ideal which calls us to do what we can do by thinking of him and by realizing what real longing looks like. Well, let me try to at least assume what longing I can generate. So again, that's why he had to seek God, because of that thin veil of ignorance. Shirish, what did Sri Ramakrishna see in Naren to yearn for him and to know that Naren is destined for greatness? Yes, Sri Ramakrishna used to say that because of his identity with the cosmic mind, with the universal consciousness, when he would see anyone, he would see them, as he said, like a glass case, a glass case where you have various things displayed, say in a home where you've got souvenirs you've picked up from around the world. You put them in a glass case so they're protected, but you can see everything in the glass case. So Sri Ramakrishna said, everyone to me is like a glass case. I can see everything within them. That is, he could see their personality, he could see their past lives, he could see their future possibilities. And so when he saw Naren, for one thing, he had that knowledge that Naren, though he appeared to be a college student that was just an ordinary student, bright, yes, very intelligent, yes, but nothing more than that. No, he could see the past of Naren, and he could see his future possibility. And see that his present was because he had not yet awakened to the purpose of his birth, the purpose for which he came. But Sri Ramakrishna had also seen in a vision the fact that Naren, before he ever met Naren, before he had ever seen him, he saw in a vision that Naren was one of the Saptarshis, one of the seven rishis, the seven rishis created at the beginning of the universe, whose eternal meditation keeps this universe afloat. It's their meditation which keeps this a cosmos, keeps it from devolving into chaos. So he saw that Naren was a great soul who had been born to bring spirituality to the world by being the helper of Sri Ramakrishna. That he saw in a vision. And then when he saw Narayan, he recognized him as the person he had seen in the vision, one of the 7 rishis. And he also saw his nature revealed before him just by looking at him. But one more thing, let me say, and then close. I'll get your question next. He saw that. No, I've forgotten what I was going to say. I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and take your question, and maybe that will come back to me.
Maharaj, when you see some religious things, I saw some Krishna's picture, and it was so beautiful, and it stuck to my mind, that it stayed in my mind. And when I was doing, it is a hallucination or what, when I did my meditation, it came to me at that time. So I'm little confused that it is the God himself at that time came, or it is my mind.
Yes. So the question is, she was looking at a picture of Krishna, and it was so beautiful, the picture, and it made such a deep impression that when she sat for meditation, that came to her, that image came to her. So was that God coming to her, or was it her mind that was creating it? It doesn't really matter much. Of course, it matters somewhat, but it doesn't matter. What I mean is that if it came to you as something that inspired you, made you feel wonderful, that you wanted to dwell on that, then that's enough. Whether it was an actual revelation of God or whether it was your mind presenting it, even if it was your mind that was presenting it to you, that's because it was the pure mind that was presenting it to you. And so instead of wondering, well, was that God doing it or was it my mind doing it? Just absorb yourself in the good and pure and devotional feeling you get from it. It may well have been created by your mind, but that doesn't matter. That was a pure part of your mind which manifested in that way. And so take the inspiration that you feel from that. Accept the inspiration without feeling doubtful or anything. And also, it may be that God revealing that aspect of himself to you. That may be also. But even if it's the creation of the mind, if it inspires you, that's all that you need to know. That itself is enough. So I'll stop here. And announcements have already been given, so I'll give a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhृतविग्रहं Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama.